You today for this webinar on decarbonation of supply chain. My name is Hervé Legendre. I'm the head of research for EIPM and really looking forward to this topic because this is a really important one for the years to come. And really glad to have the opportunity to share with you the result of some of the research activities we've been conducting on the topic. So the idea of this webinar is just really to provide you with an overview of the topic, because this is there's many dimensions related to it, and to help you understand what it means for you to tackle and participate to this effort in terms of decarbonation. So I really want to give you a holistic understanding of our role from a procurement standpoint. We'll start a little bit by coming back on the why this is an important topic today. We'll get acquainted with some of the key concepts behind it. Some people are talking about net zero, carbon neutral, so there's a lot of terminologies associated to decarbonation. So I won't spend too much time on this, but I need to nail a few points. Then the role of procurement, and I'll take you through a simple model that looks into the decarbonation roadmap. How do we set the direction, goals and target for decarbonation? How do we integrate that into procurement activities, and how we keep learning over time? So why? Well, short explanation. This is greenhouse gases. So when we talk about emissions, we're talking about greenhouse gases emission that are preventing heat from escaping into space and therefore warming the planet. This is one topic amongst other in terms of sustainability. This is not the only one that we need to contribute to and pay attention to, but there's a ripple effect across a number of environmental and social aspects from the climate change topic. But there is more to sustainability than climate change. This is an extract from the executive summary from the IPCC, which is the panel on climate change. In terms of what you see on the picture is a number of greenhouse gases. So we might be talking about carbon and measuring carbon emissions. In fact, there's not just carbon, but a whole set of gases, including, for instance, methane, that we need to take into consideration. The point is, when we talk about measuring carbon emissions, we are converting methane into emissions into an equivalent carbon emission. So that's why you might hear me talking about carbon emissions, but we're really addressing all of these elements. So that's the picture of the evolution of carbon of emissions, greenhouse gas emissions that we have, and we see this steady growth, global growth of emissions, and that is what we need to achieve. And you can see this is a very stiff change that we need to deliver, which is following ideally the blue line, which was the 1.5 degree target set in the Paris Agreement. And you have a number of other scenarios, knowing that today, if we continue on the current trend, we would be going into a 3 to 4 degree impact. That would be extremely significant. The Paris Agreement says we absolutely need to be beyond 2, and 1.5 should be the target. And we are just ahead a few days from the next COP that will be taking place in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. So there will be, more announcement by countries on their pledge toward the Paris Agreement at that time. So a few points about vocabulary. Following the Paris Agreement, there was countries started to commit to reduce their emissions. and they've been using the terminology of net zero targets. And this terminology has been extended to the business world, and that's why we are hearing about companies committing to net zero targets. So net zero targets, this is also linked to an organization, SBTi, the Science-Based Target Initiative. There's guidelines for every industry sector on how you can build science-based targets for your climate change decarbonation ambition. Part of it, there's no consideration for offsetting. So example, by planting trees in order to compensate for some of the emission you have. It doesn't mean that some of the companies who are talking and communicating on net zero won't communicate on offset. But in fact, their science-based target doesn't include the offset, but they can also, on top of this, add some offset to their commitment. And the focus is on this 1.5 degree increase. Okay, so the role of procurement, I think many of you have probably started to hear about the terminology Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3 emissions. So Scope 1, this is your operations, their impact in terms of emissions. Scope 2 relates more to the energy that the company is purchasing, the heat, and a number of factors that you can see here. And then Scope 3 is everything's related to the supply chain, whether downstream or upstream. So that includes the complete supply network that we leverage in order to, operate the business, deliver the product, build the product, whatever, all the suppliers. It's a bit more precise than that, and there is guidelines that can help to understand what's considered as part of Scope 3. But, the idea is everything that's in supply chain is Scope 3, except, purchase in terms of energy. But, very often people say, yeah, we're very important in procurement to that topic because of Scope 3. But I'd like to challenge that view because this is a picture that gives you a number of industry. And if you take, fashion, fast-moving goods, a lot of the emissions are coming from the supply chain. If you look at the other side of the graph, cement, steel, agriculture, well, here you might have a lot of the emissions that are coming from the operation. But procurement plays a key role in buying the assets, in buying the energy, in buying all the tools or the production facilities for this type of activity. So the biggest impact of procurement will be by directly tackling for some of these industry the emissions by changing, the assets, the technology into the future. So our role is not just Scope 3. Our role is really covering the three aspects and the three type of scope that we have here. And some of the biggest impact will actually be in some company Scope 1, especially in the sector that we have here. Next point. Implementing a decarbonation roadmap. So what I want to do here is to give you a little bit a blueprint, a guideline, trying to touch on every type of actions that we can deliver in terms of decarbonation. I'm not going to give you a complete set of tools that help you to do everything. My ambition is really to create the full picture with a certain degree of depth and understanding, but not tooling you with everything you need for that. We wouldn't, have enough time for doing this. But I think today, really important to have this kind of a big picture because, we still kind of hear a lot about the topic. We need to better understand what that means. So we look at setting the direction, how targets are set, how initial measurements are done. I will be coming back into this topic very soon. And then we can look into the number of traditional procurement activities, whether this is supplier relationship management, including supplier development, whether this is upstream procurement, being involved at an early stage in the definition of the specification, whether this is about developing category strategies, or whether this is about selecting a supplier. These are the most core business, core activities of procurement people that they do in a cross-functional way. And I'll give you some elements on each of these dimensions. I won't spend so much time on the, keep learning, industry initiative, benchmarking, and measuring progress, sharing success. We'll address measurement in the first part. I think for me, there is a mindset point about this, keep learning. There's two ways of looking at decarbonation. And the first one is simply to think it's an additional point after a long list, including other sustainability topic. This might take you into a direction where, you might be seeing this as additional cost, additional specification, additional this and that. I think it's also, especially for certain segment and category, it's a way of, putting on our eyes a new pair of glasses, a new way to look at the market, and we need to start with a blank piece of paper, really trying to understand from a future point of view, how this is going to impact the market we are operating in. And therefore, we need to be part of this industry initiative, do a lot of benchmark in terms of understanding what other companies in my industry, in the sector where I buy, or, locally are doing in this field. So go out, learn, discover the impact on the market, and look at it, look at your market with a fresh pair of eyes. That's really, for me, an important, opportunity that we have with decarbonation. Just to immediately create something that's kind of, you can relate to. I've been taking one company, Apple, and I'm sharing some key elements of their decarbonation roadmap as a way to illustrate a number of points that's on this generic roadmap. So Apple is a company that has a big stake in terms of decarbonation. Why? Because they're a brand, and it's really important for them to make sure that they're not perceived as one of the big polluters on the planet, and it's really important for them to keep the trust of their client on the topic, and they have the power to influence. They don't have so many hardware, but there's a massive footprint in terms of supply chain that's behind the few phones and the other hardware they have. So this is quite significant, and this is also helping to visualize what a company like that can do for decarbonation. So the first point in terms of stakes, ambition, goals, and objective. So the company has committed to reduce by 75% their emission by 2030, and they've had additional target on top of the science-based target. Is they want to be carbon neutral at 100% by using innovative carbon removal technique for the remaining 25%, so a certain type of offset for what will be left. So fairly ambitious and rapid goal that they've set for themselves here. This doesn't mean they won't be challenged by many people on the topic, because Apple is not moving in the direction of giving a lot of ease to repair phones, for instance. So they're being challenged on that topic about the ability of the user to extend the life of the product, and therefore also reduce some of the impact here. But they're also doing quite some key actions in order to to reduce their emissions significantly. If we look at upstream perspective, one of the key elements is they've been working hard in redesigning their phone, so it is possible to gain access to raw materials out of an old phone at the end of life of the phone. And they've even created robots, Dave and Daisy, that can be used to disassemble the phone and gain access to the raw materials. So instead of the raw materials to go to the bin at the end, it can be recuperated and it can be reintegrated into the economy. So, and there's clearly, financial stakes associated to this, because some of these raw materials are worth a lot of money. So if you have a way of, easily regaining access to them, this is really something that can make a difference. So Upstream here is a circular economy program on the phone. Another important aspect, when they started to look at their carbon footprint, they realized that there's a very specific factor that has an impact is for the production of all their hardware, iPhones. They have a lot of suppliers who are using energy sources, and they have a big program in order to make sure that their suppliers are using renewable energy. So they've been together with 10 suppliers investing in the generation of 1 gigawatt of renewable energy back in 2019. And they're also, let's say, pushing their supplier. 200 of them commit to use 100% of renewable energy for Apple production. So two things, they are not just about, they don't do it alone. They've done that with some of their suppliers, and they are flowing down some of the targets and some of the goals to their supplier. Another case, which I've classified as a low carbon aluminium into the category strategy, because this is very specific for one of the raw material that goes into the phone. I mentioned earlier steel being a big source of emission, but aluminium is also a source of emission, heavy industry type of a process. And they started by only sourcing aluminium from companies who are using renewable source of energy, and more specifically hydropower. However, there's some limits in terms of who is able to gain access to this. This is limited, so and this is not extensible. So they started, they support a joint venture between Alcoa and Rio Tinto, two big companies in the, let's say, the raw material world. This joint venture is called ELYSIS, and Apple is going to integrate some of the low carbon aluminium that's produced by ELYSIS using a new process, a new production process. So this will be in Apple product very soon. And they've been supported with some of their green bonds, this initiative. So, that gives you some understanding of, the priority setting and some of the projects in the different box that a company like Apple has been doing. This is not the only thing they do, but it's just trying to illustrate quickly some of the elements we have here. But let me go back a little bit more into this, each of them. So, communicating on the stakes and ambition. This starts by defining the net zero target of the company and putting together a roadmap with a number of opportunity to decarbonize the company on all of the scope, so scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. So very often you will see this type of picture that describe a little bit the commitment of a company in terms of decarbonation. If I go to, I'll come back to the other slide after. So company to do that, they need to commit by sending a letter to the Science-Based Target Initiative. You've got the link here. There's plenty of guidelines for sectors and some case study. It's really a good source of information. I would encourage you to look into this one to see if there's something in your industry that you can look at or in your supply market. It's always useful. Then you start to commit, then you develop your targets using the guidelines. The guidelines are really, really precise. So for instance, if you are in the aviation sector, to be able to communicate on a science-based target, you need to have a minimal of sustainable fuel that you would be using 10% within a certain time frame. So it's not just high-level rough figures, but there's really detailed guidelines that can also be useful for you to understand what's coming your way in terms of commitment that you need to have for the company. Then you submit, you communicate, and then you need to start to go into a process of disclosing with the CDP, Carbon Disclosure Project, disclose your emission on a yearly basis. So it's a whole reporting process. Doing all this can take quite some time already. And I think it's important to get started pretty early in terms of moving into action and not waiting so long before all of this is done. And then, hey, what should we be doing now? Very important point, a lot of discussions have been going on how do we measure the carbon footprint, the carbon emissions, the greenhouse gas emissions. So there's no single source of truth, and something that we need to have in mind, there will be different ways of making measurement because they correspond to different situations. And I don't see the emergence into the near future or even midterm of a sort of universal calculator that will give you the emissions. It will be more complex, and there will be some good reason to use this or that mechanism to get access to information. For doing the reporting, typically we're using spend-based or weight-based type of measure. So we've got one factor, either money or a weight. We multiply that by an emission factor, and that gives you an approximation of what you have. It's the simplest form of calculation. That's what's used for CDP. There's multiple sources of emission factors that are available. Some of them can be industry specific, for instance. You've got the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, which is another organization that provides some tools to do that. It's not that accurate because you're just taking a value like a weight or a dollar in time of inflation. So it's not going to give you really a measure, and you'll be able from one year to another to make some measurement of your progress based on this. But this is used for reporting, and therefore this is a good starting point, and it can help to set some early priorities. Other sources of data can include life cycle assessment. So a life cycle assessment is a methodology to understand the environmental impact of a product throughout the complete life cycle, from its design to its end of life. This might be developed by a university, this might be developed as an ISO standard, this might be developed by a group of companies. So there's many sources of life cycle assessment. And some companies have been integrating all of these tools into some software solution that you can use to understand, the impact of a certain production process, a certain design, a certain material, in terms of not just, carbon, but a whole set of environmental impact, acidification, impact on species and all these elements, biodiversity. So this is a very good tool that we can use at an early stage. Carbon is a new cost. So like cost, if we are involved early, influencing and discussing on the specification, there's more opportunity to go to a low carbon solution at an early time. You can use some of the software. I don't really like to mention names of software. If you want, write to me. I'll be happy to send you a few examples. You need to find the right one for your industry and the one that will be fit for purpose for your organization. I can give you a few hints, but I'm not here advertising for anyone specifically. This will help you to gain access to detailed scenarios, decomposition of carbon, for instance. And this is something that you can start to use to start to have exchange with some of your suppliers on the topic. The last one is a bit more complex, but will be very interesting because this will become one of the very much talked topic of the future in supply chain. And they will start to appear in 2026 with batteries for electrical vehicles, because the European Union is going to require a number of industry, and it will start with the batteries, to have a digital product passport. So what's a digital product passport? Like, you take a battery, you break it down into all the supply chain, and every company that's part of the supply chain is going to produce a certain volume of information that they will have on their own system. And every time that this will be integrated into a battery, all of this information will be made accessible through a series of identifier and connectors, if you want. And whenever there will be a repair, a change to the battery, this will also be integrated. And at the end, you might have one QR code, for instance, or one identifier, and this will give you access to information provided by all the companies that have been involved in the supply chain, in the manufacturing of a battery, for instance. This can include not just information about CO2 or origin of materials, but you can also associate, for instance, instruction on how to disassemble the product at the end of life. So it can be quite rich in terms of enabling the circular economy. I think the circular economy is a very big part of what any country needs to achieve. There is a lot of jobs behind it. There is a lot of the carbon reduction at the level of countries that's coming from implementing this circular economy logic, but also there's a critical impact in terms of virgin raw materials. If we're able to reintegrate into the economic process some of the raw materials at the end of life, for Europe we could be reducing 36% of our dependency on virgin raw materials. So that's quite huge in terms of our impact on needs of raw materials. So it's not just a pure carbon aspect. There's many other dimensions associated with that. So I won't go too much into detail. Maybe next year I'll do a webinar on information sharing along supply chain. I think this is really an interesting topic that will push us to think very differently about information, and we see a lot of early development in this field. So no single source of truth, different ways of accessing information, and I don't see a window of opportunity by which we would be able to standardize everything and come up with a universal calculator. I think there will be, for some good reason, diverse solution. Didn't mention the one provided by supplier themselves. In some industry, you might depend on a very big supplier and integrator. Take telecoms and their bigger integrators whether this is an Ericsson, whether this is a Nokia, doing all their equipment. Well, in that case, typically they will be certified to make the life cycle assessment, and they will providing you some of the data themselves. You need to understand how this is calculated. You need to be able to have discussion and to discuss their decarbonation roadmap. But you also want to understand it enough to make sure that you can compare apple with apple. So they're not talking about the company, but apple with apple. They having something that's comparable across supplier, because you want to make sure they use the same reference when making their calculation. Okay, but you don't need all that to start looking at priorities. If you have a segment, a category full of steel, cement, chemicals, if your supplier are extensively using coal or gas, if this is agricultural product or coming for forestry, the LUCF is everything's related to forestry outside of agriculture. Any person who's buying transportation has already been exposed to topic related to decarbonation. Any person involved in buildings and offices, same. And the other point that you have on this picture from BCG fugitive is leakages you might have in some infrastructure, for instance. And well, waste is waste. So if you have your category heavily dependent on this element, then you can start to have conversation with your suppliers, looking at industry initiative and make some investigation. Don't wait for your company to define the net zero target. You can already work on the topic. So now let's go into the next section, and that will be about how do we integrate decarbonation in procurement activities. I talk about procurement, but everything I'm going to be describing is actually a cross-functional effort. It's not just procurement who's suddenly on its own making a difference. It is by our ability to work together with other functions that we can make these efforts powerful and efficient. So I already mentioned them, integrating decarbonation in supplier relationship management activities, in upstream procurement, in category strategies, and in supplier selection. I will go into this order because, let's say, probably the supplier relationship management, supplier development is often a good starting point for some companies. So integrating in SRM activities, decarbonation, this is something where there's quite a number of initiatives that have been started, so it's quite easy to benchmark companies on the topic. So companies who are pioneers have started to develop their supply chain on the topic. Some of them, like Mart, PepsiCo, and McCormick, they've done that together instead of individually going to all of their supplier, and they're doing it together with the same tools, which also can help company not to be facing multiple requirement and tools when looking at that topic. That can include helping them to do some assessment, helping them to providing them some training, providing them some calculators, some tools, resources that can help them to make some progress, and having mutual learning. So having some form of sessions where they can exchange and discuss together within some industry. That's not a problem. Other industry it might be more competitive, but you can. So typically, you won't be going to your giant multinational supplier. You'll go to mid-size companies. You will be selecting suppliers across different segments. And you'll realize today, it might change in the future, but most companies have very limited expertise, and small, medium enterprise have often no expertise on the topic. And immediately it raises a number of fear on how much they will have to invest to make that work, how much this is going to increase the price of their product, and is this going to challenge their market relevance. There are a number of factors where this is going to be competence destroying, and this will really change the functioning of some industry. There's other industry that will be, emerging and developing out of this. But there's also plenty of industry where it will be an accumulation of good practice and more incremental changes that will be happening here. Beyond supplier development effort that can be conducted over a few months with a group of, 200. I've seen companies going from 150 to 1,000 suppliers in terms of setting some supplier development program on the topic, for instance. But you need to build something at the scale of your company. You can have an exchange on the decarbonation roadmap with some of your suppliers, especially the ones that are more advanced, some of the bigger companies. So you can be people from your R&D team, from the people that have a long-term perspective on the evolution of, your buildings, your things like that, and then have a discussion with some of the suppliers in that field to understand, what are they putting as solution in front of the need for decarbonize, and have some good workshops, like an innovation workshop with some of your supplier. You can also have a workshop that's more focused on a specific supplier selection. This can be built on the 9R, which is the 9, I'll come back on this in a few slides. 9 levers we can use for the implementation of the circular economy. I did a webinar some time ago on the topic of circular economy, so you can find the video on the YouTube, EIPM YouTube, if you're interested to look into this. But I'll say a few more words just after. And you might have some joint decarbonation project with a specific supplier. So SRM, there's from supplier development to exchange of roadmap to decarbonation joint project. And this is the class and workshops. This is the classic way of pushing for decarbonation. 9R, this is the circular economy. 4 way of thinking about it. Narrow the flow, reduce. How can we use less materials? Can we eliminate some packaging? Can we get rid of this and that? So that's the first way. The best resources is the one that we leave in the ground. So very also positive impact in terms of cost usually. Decontenting what we have and reducing the resources we need to build whatever we have to build. Slow the loop, make sure that we can extend the life cycle of what we use to a maximum by reusing, repairing, refurbishing, repurposing. There's a different R that are helpful here. I won't go into the detail, but extend the life cycle of what we buy for durability, buy for simplicity of repair. These are very important factors in extending the life of products, and very powerful levers that we need to use. Closing the loop, in the end, could be recycling, recovering. The one before are better levers. This one comes only at the end. And rethink is very often a more fundamental way of reconsidering how we are looking at what we buy. So, for instance, it can include in a contract a take-back option. So you're buying something from a supplier, but they commit to take it back and to do something with it at the end of life. So you don't, bury the burden of the end of life and they have access to it, so they can make sure they can implement some of the other R levers here in order to be more efficient from a resource usage point of view. Rethink can also be about changing the business model. We see a lot of move that support the circular economy, where we buy as a service instead of buying a classic type of equipment. So we are moving from a capex logic, an investment logic, to an operation cost. We have a subscription. We pay on a, I don't know, monthly basis instead of buying the capex. And then the company is able to make the best possible use of all of the levers that we have here. For instance, you know, the medical equipment, hospital can now, instead of buying their own equipment, having them as a service, as a subscription, and it goes back to the manufacturer at the end of life, or when they want to go for a new version of this equipment. So very important. I've been delivering in one of the masterclass I was doing online for our master students an overview on this topic, and immediately one of the people in the room started to apply that to the purchase of production equipment, and now they're checking systematically, you know, can we reduce, can we reuse, how could we better repair, refurbish, recycle, recover, and they screen all of their purchase using this for any kind of investment for production. And this is a good workshop that you can do with some supplier in order to start brainstorming some of the opportunities to do things differently here. Good. So that takes us beyond the 9R. Another example of a supplier program. This is the Apple Supplier Clean Energy, to show that all over the years, there's been some actions by Apple to support the access to green energy on the supply side. You will be getting the slides, so I'll leave them to you. We don't need to go in detail about this one. Upstream activities from the design stage. Again, carbon is the new cost. If we are involved early in the definition of specification, we've got more opportunity to have a low carbon specification that is going to translate into lower emissions. The idea here is to understand the factors that are driving emissions in order to optimize the design of the product. I'll take a fairly simple example. If you take a bottle of glass, this can have, in terms of emissions, between 700 kilogram of CO2 equivalent emissions per ton, till more or less the double of that, depending on a number of factors. What are these factors? The production process that's used to produce the bottle, the smelting process can be different, and it might be using different sources of energy. So these are two factors that will influence the emissions. Inside the glass, you have ingredients. Sometimes you've got brown glass. These tend to be, I think, lower emission glass. You have a completely transparent glass. Well, that would be a bigger emission factor than a brown one. Recycling share, how much of the raw materials use the glass is being incorporated into the smelting process, is also having an impact. The country of origin and the mode of transportation would be having an impact on these emissions. So, like we have cost driver, we have factors that are influencing the emissions whenever we are designing and we are specifying what we want to buy. We can involve suppliers in some of this discussion around the life cycle assessment. This doesn't need to be on our own. We can use software to do this type of calculation. We can map existing and future supply chain through the access also to some of the data that's accessible here, and we can think about our supply chain in a different way by looking at it from this angle. And we can also, out of this, look at how we can switch of technology, of source of raw materials, of other factors, and develop technology roadmap that will be favoring decarbonation into the future. So upstream, being early at the specification stage, bringing some supplier, very important aspect. I'll give you a case. This is coming from the water industry. And this is a company active in the water infrastructure business. So they're setting up infrastructure for water. They were using a lot of classic alloys for their product, infrastructure product. And they started to look into switching the raw materials they were using and going into ceramics instead of these alloys. So they're been agreeing with their client, because this is something that needs to be validated with their client, to homologate some of these new raw materials for the design of some of their infrastructural pieces of equipment. This is significantly reduces the CO2 impact. Part of the reason behind that is the use of a recycled material inside the design of this the production of this product, but also the fact that production was kept in Europe, a local one. They estimated the impact on all of the redesign they've done, 10,000 jobs that have been kept in Europe because of the change of raw materials. This is also extending the life cycle of the product by enabling a better resistance to chemicals. So this is also having a positive impact in terms of CO2. An additional benefit: better working condition, reduction number of accidents because of a reduced weight and the ease of installation. And altogether, if you put all the benefits, yes, there is an early investment because you need to change the design, requalify, get the approval, test them. You need to scale production, but you have a positive TCO impact of such a change that really makes a difference in the end. Whenever we start looking into category strategies, you will start to look into what has been produced for your reference market in terms of a generic roadmap for decarbonation. So typically, you will start to type in your favorite search engine the name of your market, where you are, your category, and you will be, you can put decarbonation, low carbon, roadmap, file type .pdf, and this will bring you 80 pages document on what should be the decarbonation roadmap for that industry. So I give you here an example from the UK cement industry that have been putting together what would be the solution that would help the whole industry to move in the right direction. Of course, you need to understand who's behind that. Are they, this could be some companies that are trying maybe to slow down the change and not go too fast, commit, but not overcommit too soon. Or you might have more mixed group where there's a real genuine push for making a change here. So, like anything, any industry association, any kind of initiative, you need to understand who's behind it. Very important point: what's feasible and scalable by when? Solution will come up at different point in time. They will have different impact. So maybe the one in the next 2 years will bring you there, but there will be a much better one coming just after. Should we switch now? Should we wait before switching? Should we publicly support one or another? Plenty of questions you need to answer in your category strategy. And how viable is this? Is this really something we can count on? Or, there's half of the people who say, no way, we'll never be making a difference with this. And the other half says, this is the next big solution that make a difference. So we need to have a view about the viability of this switch. And very important will be the capability of some industry to move to new dominant design, so a new form of solution that will be largely used across the industry that can make a difference. Within your category strategy, if this is not all over your category strategy, then create a very specific template about it. I gave you some ideas of what could be on your one page for the decarbonation. Try to understand what's the impact on the market. Is this something that's going to improve the competencies and the capabilities of all the suppliers? Is this something that will bring some differentiation to a few suppliers? Or is this something that's going to eliminate some supplier? You will have very different situation across different sectors. So I think this is really important because some of your supplier can be threatened. But other field, it might just be a set of good practice that will be adopted over time. So really important to understand, that long-term impact on the market. Homogeneity is everyone at the same stage, or do you have some very advanced supplier where others are way behind? Again, very different because the way you will go to the market with in these two cases might be very different. So make sure you've got a good understanding of how the curve is looking in terms of, the distribution of the future. Are some of the organization already well advanced when others are lagging, or everybody at the same level? Maturity, immature, some roadmap exists, or we start to see emerging some of the winning solutions. So try to understand the maturity of the solution and the impact of the solution. Strategy, are we going to contribute to shape the evolution of the market? Apple is shaping the evolution of the aluminum market, for instance. Are we going to influence by participating in an industry initiative, publicly committing to go into a certain technology for the future? So this can be ways of, setting the direction, pushing suppliers to make a difference. Sometimes talking to the tier 2 supplier and showing yourself as a supporter of their development can be a way to influence the market, getting together in an industry association to maybe promote some of the way forward, or simply, harvesting some of the efforts done by others, waiting for solution to emerge and then, picking the one. So that's the kind of a strategy that you would be putting together on some of your segments. Integration in supplier selection, I think, I'm not going to talk about criterion, things like this. I think have in mind it can make your job in terms of going to the market and selecting a supplier quite complex. So anticipate, try to understand the options, look at your market with, as I said, a new pair of eyes or glasses, and understand what will be happening. If you want to, if you have a project where you need to buy furnitures for the office, you might go directly to the market and suddenly realize that, there's a group of suppliers that have a very traditional business model and they have no clues about decarbonation. At the same time, you've got another group of suppliers who are already offering you to, rent your furniture instead of buying your furniture, but you still need to understand, how much they decarbonize by implementing the circular economy principle. But then you need to understand that if you are moving to a furniture rental business, then you're in a situation where you need to manage your subscriptions and maybe have, your different local buildings, offices, who have different contracts with different companies for getting their furnitures. And maybe you need to have a tool, part of your process for purchasing, that's going to manage your subscription over time. So anticipate, try to understand what exists before jumping into a very classic, RFQ, RFP type of process, in order to be really able to bring to your stakeholders, here are the options, this is where the market can be going, how do we need to design our supplier selection process to really give a chance to some of these solutions, or maybe experiment with some while we might be keeping the old solution for a certain amount of time. So that's what I would say is important when we integrate decarbonation in supplier selection. So overall, this is giving you an overview of what can be done. Everything we do, we can start to think about carbon sustainability. This is an opportunity for procurement to take a leadership role. We will not be the one single leader on the topic. This is always teamwork, cross-functional work with suppliers that can help make a difference. But we have a very pivotal role to play into this effort for decarbonation. And the job is immense. There's so many things that needs to be done. There's so many opportunities to do things differently that we can't wait and waste time. We need to go ahead. Final words, we deliver training on the topic. We can also take a group of people over a period of 12 weeks and drive them to become a carbon knowledge hub for their stakeholder, with the goal of, at the end of the 12 weeks, to organize a meeting with the internal stakeholders, maybe with some suppliers, with a sort of a knowledge sharing activity that really position procurement as a central player into this evolution. You have on the internet access through this connection to a maturity model that have been crowd sourcing from people on LinkedIn. So a lot of people have contributed. It's open access content. So this is a maturity model. One company has started to use that to create an assessment tool for their suppliers. And we've got more tools that we've been working on developing, that we leverage in our training. Send me your problems, send me your requests, send me your solutions, send me your case studies. The more you bring me problems and case studies, the more I can integrate that into the development of a big body of knowledge that can really help all of us make a difference for the future, because the job is big. We need to do a lot of things. If you have any question, I'm going to stay here. I'm happy to answer some of the questions, but I've finished for this webinar. I hope I gave you a good overview of what is decarbonation about, what's the role of procurement, gave you some hints on how we can get started, and that's it, really. Yes, we can share that presentation. You will get it tomorrow automatically as a PDF, so you will have access to it. And making a bit of announcement for a future webinar that we'll be having. Any other question, any other feedback, any other reactions? Thank you, Maria. And don't hesitate, if you want to talk about the topic, always very happy. Sharing knowledge is really helpful in this field. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Mehmet. Great. Fred, I think we're over.